My best friend secretly recorded my panic attacks and used them for her mental health project without my consent. When I begged her to stop, she just smiled and said, "I've done it before," and I never said a word. That betrayal haunted me for 19 months, until yesterday, when her deception was exposed and she lost her academic career forever. 2 years prior, my mobility was compromised in a vehicle collision. Subsequently, the campus transformed into a daunting labyrinth of malfunctioning lifts and inaccessible locked entryways. I consumed my midday meal in solitude daily, as my former companions handled me with a fragility that suggested I might shatter if they uttered an incorrect phrase. Then, Rachel appeared. She observed my struggle with a cumbersome library entrance and did not merely assist. She became indignant on my behalf. She possessed comprehensive knowledge of every accessibility regulation and compelled the administration to genuinely heed our concerns. Within a few weeks, she introduced me to the university's Disability Advocacy Collective. For the initial time since my incident, I experienced a sense of normalcy once more. Rachel evolved into my closest confidant. She remained awake until 3 in the morning, aiding me in drafting grievances regarding inaccessible restrooms. She transported me to medical appointments when my anxiety prevented me from attending alone, and when I experienced panic attacks concerning my prospects, she guided me through them with a serene self-assurance that rendered everything manageable. However, Rachel posed numerous inquiries, particularly precise ones about my most challenging periods following the accident. She sought specific information regarding my adaptation journey and coping strategies. I presumed she was simply endeavoring to comprehend my circumstances more thoroughly. She documented our discussions, which seemed peculiar, yet she asserted it was for strategic advocacy planning. One evening, I discovered a compact voice recorder in her satchel during a group gathering. She dismissed it with a chuckle, claiming she utilized it for note-taking due to her poor penmanship. Something felt amiss, but Rachel had provided such extensive support that questioning her seemed ungrateful. Last Tuesday, I was studying with Rachel in the library when she stepped away to answer a call. Her laptop was open, and I observed a document titled Disability Trauma Narratives, a Qualitative Analysis. I clicked on it, and my stomach plummeted as I recognized my own words quoted verbatim from conversations I believed were confidential. There was a folder labeled Audio Files TM, bearing my initials. I accessed it and found dozens of recordings of our most intimate exchanges. My voice articulated the night I attempted self-harm 6 months after my accident. The emotional breakdown I experienced in her vehicle upon realizing I would never regain the ability to walk. Every vulnerable moment I had shared was meticulously cataloged, as if it were research data. Upon Rachel's return, I confronted her directly. She immediately became defensive, asserting I was exhibiting paranoia and that it was merely general research. I pressed further, inquiring about the audio files marked with my initials. Her countenance underwent a complete alteration. The warm, supportive demeanor I knew so intimately vanished, replaced by something cold. She informed me that even if she were utilizing my narrative, which she was not admitting to, it would be beneficial to individuals like myself. I demanded to review all information she possessed concerning me. Rachel declined, becoming irate, stating she could not fathom my lack of trust after all she had done. I conveyed that those were my narratives to share, not hers. She countered that it was inconsequential and that she had acted similarly before. I requested an explanation, and Rachel confessed she habitually cultivated friendships with any student on campus exhibiting apparent disabilities for the purpose of studying them. It was not personal, it was methodological. The entire disability advocacy collective functioned essentially as her research laboratory, populated with students she had cultivated as unwitting participants. She defended her approaches, questioning how else she was expected to obtain authentic data, given that individuals do not readily disclose in formal interviews. I attempted to inform other group members, but Rachel had persuaded each of us that we were her special confidant while systematically observing us all. Some members defended her, suggesting that at least someone acknowledged our experiences. I lodged a formal complaint with the university's ethics committee. The complaint revealed how Rachel had leveraged the advocacy group as an unethical research environment, targeting students with disabilities under the guise of camaraderie. Yesterday, I received an electronic mail from Rachel that sent shivers down my spine. She stated she had already submitted her dissertation, incorporating all recordings from multiple subjects, and these accounts would be published irrespective of our preferences. I clicked the hyperlink with trembling digits. The page loaded sluggishly, unveiling a professional conference website. My heart ceased beating. There it was, a research submission portal for the International Disability Studies Conference. The preview window automatically played audio that I instantly recognized. My own voice, fractured and raw, detailing my suicide attempt from 6 months post-accident. The view counter displayed 847. My mobile device rang. My mother's name illuminated the display. I answered with a shaky hand. Her voice conveyed panic and bewilderment. She inquired if I was safe, if I was all right. She repeatedly stated that Rachel had transmitted something unsettling. Mom elucidated that Rachel had emailed her the conference link with a message suggesting my mother should be aware of the extent of my ongoing distress. My mother's voice quivered as she implored me to return home immediately. I seized my keys and drove to my parents' residence, my thoughts racing. The 20-minute journey felt like hours. Upon entering the driveway, I observed Rachel's vehicle already present. My stomach churned. Inside, I found Rachel seated on our living room sofa, comforting my weeping mother. She gazed at me with the same solicitous expression she had perfected over months of feigning friendship. Mom rushed to embrace me, asking why I had not disclosed the depth of my ongoing struggles. Rachel slowly rose, explaining how she had identified these alarming indicators regarding my psychological state. She presented herself as the concerned associate who merely wished to assist. My father emerged from the kitchen, insisting Rachel remain for the evening meal. He expressed repeated gratitude for her alerting them to my situation. I sat at the dining table, observing Rachel serve my preferred dish, chicken parmesan with extra mozzarella. She knew precisely how I enjoyed it. Later, I realized she must have extracted that information from recorded dialogues with my mother during what she termed support check-ins. Throughout the dinner, Rachel divulged intimate specifics about our bond. She recounted anecdotes that sounded compassionate to my parents, but felt like infringements to me. She referenced private conversations, framing them as instances of her providing assistance. My parents absorbed every word, appreciative that someone was attending to their offspring. Following dinner, I overheard Rachel conversing privately with my father in his study. She voiced apprehension regarding my isolation and what she labeled obsessive conduct. She employed clinical terminology, making my indignation about her research sound like paranoia. I stood in the corridor, listening to my father pledge to monitor me more closely. The subsequent morning, my phone rang early. My disability benefits caseworker explained that an anonymous concerned citizen had submitted a report regarding my deteriorating mental well-being. The report asserted my condition was impeding my capacity to perform daily living activities. They required me to attend an immediate evaluation. During the benefits interview that afternoon, the caseworker posed specific questions about my daily routines. She was aware of my bathroom schedule, my medication timings, even particulars about my therapy appointments. The information could only have originated from Rachel's recordings. The caseworker mentioned that the concerned citizen had furnished extensive documentation concerning my recent behavioral shifts. Rachel arrived at the benefits office while I was still being interviewed. She introduced herself as my support liaison, claiming she had been assisting me in managing my disability. She described what she termed concerning behavioral alterations with clinical precision. I recognized my own utterances from private discussions, distorted into evidence of decline. The benefits investigator documented notes as Rachel spoke. She recommended an immediate psychiatric assessment based on Rachel's comprehensive report. Rachel had depicted me as an individual experiencing paranoid ideations, specifically regarding being researched and recorded without permission. That evening, I uncovered something even more distressing. My therapist telephoned to discuss some unsettling information she had obtained. Rachel had been transmitting audio clips to her, purporting to be my designated support person authorized to share progress updates. My therapist's notes from recent sessions contained my exact statements from conversations I had shared with Rachel in her vehicle. My therapist confessed she had been modifying my treatment based on Rachel's observations. She believed Rachel was being helpful by offering supplementary context about my daily existence. She had no inkling these were research recordings made without my cognizance. Rachel called the following day, offering to transport me to the psychiatric evaluation. She behaved as if nothing untoward had transpired, maintaining her persona as a supportive companion. During the car journey, I observed her phone propped on the dashboard, capturing my anxiety responses as we drove. My younger sibling contacted me that night, divulging something that made me feel unwell. They had been providing Rachel with updates concerning our family's worries because Rachel had persuaded them she was monitoring my suicidal thoughts. Rachel knew precisely which questions to ask, my sibling recounted. She appeared so well-informed about indicators of mental health distress. I began to notice the timing of Rachel's supportive telephone calls. They consistently occurred immediately after my therapy appointments, when I was most susceptible. She was fabricating artificial cycles of crisis, calling when she knew I would be emotional, then documenting my reactions for her investigation. Everything became evident when I encountered Rachel's romantic partner at a coffee shop. He recognized me instantly. He had been my physical therapist following the accident. He casually mentioned sharing observations about patterns of regression he had noted during our sessions. He believed Rachel was a family member assisting with my care. The intimate medical specifics he had disclosed were details only my treatment team should have possessed. I gained access to Rachel's dwelling when she was attending a class. In her desk, I discovered my medical records with sections emphasized in yellow. Annotations in the margins analyzed my emotional volatility and what she termed dependency behaviors. Everything was categorized and cross-referenced with her audio recordings. Rachel had also been coordinating with my academic advisor. Electronic mail exchanges between them discussed documenting my declining performance as part of her longitudinal trauma study. My advisor thought he was contributing to research that would aid students with disabilities. My closest friend eventually admitted why they had been distant recently. Rachel had convinced them I needed to cultivate self-reliance. She stated that maintaining distance would facilitate my healing. Then she recorded my responses to isolation, documenting how I reacted to the loss of my support network. I learned Rachel had been residing in my apartment complex for 3 months. The chance encounters in the laundry facility, the coincidental meetings in the parking area, all meticulously timed to observe my natural behavioral patterns. She had been observing me long before our official introduction. Her research notes unveiled something horrifying. During her ostensibly helpful apartment visits, she had been concealing my pain medication to study withdrawal effects. The days I believed I had miscounted my pills, the times I felt worse than usual, all orchestrated for her research. Even my service animal had been impacted. He exhibited confusion regarding Rachel's commands after weeks of her offering treats during visits. She disrupted his training, documenting his altered responses as part of her study on disability support frameworks. Rachel confessed she had secured a research grant specifically for investigating my case. For 2 years, my personal trauma had been subsidizing her education. The grant application portrayed me as an ideal subject with clearly documented indicators of trauma. I realized our association commenced precisely when my initial trauma therapy concluded. She timed her approach to examine what she called post-treatment adjustment patterns. Every moment of our companionship had been calculated for maximum investigative utility. Rachel disclosed she possessed sufficient recorded material to publish multiple academic papers concerning my adaptation mechanisms. She no longer required my consent. The data had been collected, transcribed, and analyzed. My most private moments had become academic property. I observed Rachel's brother arrive at my parents' home the subsequent week. My elder brother, Nathan, had consistently been protective of me since the accident, but Rachel had been texting him for days. She had shared carefully edited recordings of me expressing frustration regarding his overprotectiveness. By the time he entered our parents' residence, he perceived me differently. Rachel greeted him with a warm embrace, referencing his childhood moniker, Nate the Great, which I had shared during one of our recorded conversations about family dynamics. Nathan sat opposite me at the kitchen table while Rachel prepared coffee. She knew precisely how he preferred it. 2 sugars, a dash of cream. Information she had extracted from my descriptions of family breakfast routines. I watched her actions, noting how she touched his shoulder when placing the mug before him, how she chuckled at his jokes with practiced warmth. The transformation occurred rapidly. Within 2 weeks, they were dating. Rachel attended our family dinners, occupying my customary seat beside Nathan. She would reference inside jokes from anecdotes I had recounted to her, fabricating a false intimacy through pilfered memories. My attempts to caution Nathan proved futile. Rachel had already played him recordings where I lamented feeling stifled by familial concern. He interpreted my warnings as envy over losing my closest friend to him. I confronted Nathan in his apartment one evening. He displayed his mobile device, revealing voice messages Rachel had transmitted to him. My own voice permeated the room, describing what Rachel termed my obsessive behavioral patterns concerning her research. The recordings were authentic but devoid of context. My processing of the betrayal became evidence of instability. Nathan urged me to seek assistance, suggesting I was experiencing paranoid episodes. Rachel had provided him with articles concerning trauma-induced psychosis. My therapy journals vanished from my apartment during Rachel's next supportive visit. I had concealed them in my closet, but she had photographed every page while feigning assistance with organization. Those pages appeared in her research proposal, submitted to the university's psychology department. My most confidential thoughts about suicidal ideation, my struggles with identity after acquiring a disability, my apprehensions about the future, all transmuted into academic data points. Rachel's research assistant approached me outside the library. She introduced herself as Catherine, explaining she had been engaged to implement something called the TM method with other students with disabilities. Rachel had devised a training manual based on my exploitation. Catherine displayed the document on her laptop, a step-by-step guide for cultivating trust with vulnerable students, identifying their emotional triggers, and maintaining access to their private existences. I discovered video files on a shared drive. Catherine granted me access to hours of footage from Rachel's apartment visits, me grappling with transfers, weeping during panic attacks, contending with bathroom difficulties. Each video bore clinical labels, subject TM, authentic disability experience documentation. Day 127. The camera angles revealed she had concealed recording devices throughout my living space during her helpful visits. The Academic Ethics Committee scheduled a preliminary review of my grievance. Rachel's advisor, Dr. Jonathan Chun, contended her methods represented groundbreaking immersive inquiry. He presented her work as the vanguard of disability studies, dismissing my concerns about consent as retroactive regret. The committee appeared more invested in safeguarding the university's research standing than in addressing the exploitation. I ascertained Rachel had been accessing my student electronic mail for months. She had observed me logging into library computers during our study sessions, committing my password to memory. Through my email, she had monitored my class schedules, therapy appointments, and communications with disability support services. She knew precisely when I would be vulnerable, when I would be alone, when I would require assistance. Rachel's social media transformed my image into academic currency. Photographs from our association, me in my wheelchair at campus events, contending with accessibility barriers, commemorating minor triumphs, appeared in her conference presentation materials. She had constructed her academic reputation upon my pilfered moments, gaining recognition as an innovative researcher. While I remained an anonymous case study, my campus therapist disclosed Rachel had been attending our disability support group meetings for months. She had presented herself as my advocate and emotional support individual, documenting notes during our most sensitive group discussions. The narratives of other members also appeared in her research, their private struggles transmuted into data sets. The therapist had welcomed her presence, believing she was aiding my coping process. Rachel presented at the Regional Disability Studies Conference. I observed the live stream from my laptop, feeling nauseated as she played audio recordings of my private conversations. Academic audiences took notes while my voice detailed the night I had wished to perish. She discussed my fascinating adaptation mechanisms with clinical detachment. The presentation concluded with applause. My trauma had become entertainment. The financial aid department contacted me regarding apprehensions about my psychological fitness for continued enrollment. Rachel's documented worries about my mental state had initiated a review. My funding hung precariously while I struggled to substantiate my stability. The stress exacerbated my physical symptoms. Spasticity intensified. Transfers became more arduous. My meticulously maintained routine disintegrated. Rachel's research collaborator revealed the full scope of their endeavor. They had been conducting family support surveys with my relatives, introduced through Rachel's established connection as my trusted companion. My aunts, uncles, and cousins had shared their observations about my recovery, believing they were assisting Rachel in helping me. Their private concerns became research data concerning family systems and disability. I realized Rachel had been wearing my attire during her research presentations. Items that disappeared during her laundry assistance visits reappeared in conference photographs. She wore my preferred pullover while discussing my case, my adaptive garments while analyzing my subject behaviors. The violation felt deeply personal. She had literally enveloped herself in my identity while reducing me to mere data. Rachel extended an offer through her legal representative. She would obliterate all recordings if I affixed my signature to retroactive consent forms legitimizing her inquiry. The forms incorporated clauses preventing me from publicly discussing her methodologies. Refusing implied she would release unsettling recordings to disability services, my family, and academic departments. My choice was silence or destruction. I rejected her proposition. Rachel's response was immediate. Recordings materialized in my department chair's electronic inbox. My professors received files documenting my deteriorating mental condition. My academic standing crumbled as faculty questioned my capacity to complete coursework. Rachel framed her apprehensions as those of a concerned friend attempting to avert tragedy. The former leader of the advocacy group contacted me via social media. They had departed campus abruptly the preceding year, and now I comprehended why. They shared recordings they had made of Rachel discussing her intentions for studying me. In the audio, Rachel characterized me as the quintessential subject, possessing clearly documented trauma markers and minimal interference from a support network. I had been targeted from the outset. I learned Rachel had overcome my initial resistance employing techniques derived from my own therapy recordings. She had analyzed my trust patterns, pinpointing the precise manner to approach me when my defenses were weakest. My therapist's notes regarding the cultivation of healthy relationships became Rachel's blueprint for manipulation. She had weaponized my healing against me. My parents opted to preserve their association with Rachel despite my evidence. She had convinced them she was monitoring my mental well-being, providing updates they desperately desired. They believed she comprehended my condition more thoroughly than I did. Family dinners persisted with Rachel at the table while I dined alone in my apartment. She dispatched regular reports concerning my unsettling isolation. The deprivation of familial support felt like drowning. Rachel had so thoroughly integrated herself into my existence that extricating her meant forfeiting everyone I cherished. My brother brought her to family gatherings. My parents consulted her regarding my care. My siblings confided their worries to her. I became the unstable one, the paranoid one, the individual requiring assistance. I commenced documenting our interactions utilizing the strategies Rachel had demonstrated through example. My mobile device captured her admission that she had been observing me for months prior to our initial encounter. I recorded her discussions with other researchers concerning subject cultivation tactics. The evidence accumulated, but gathering it necessitated adopting her characteristics: manipulative, calculating, perpetually recording. Catherine consented to assist me in exposing the full scope of Rachel's research. I manipulated her by feigning suicidal ideation, knowing she had been trained to respond to crises. She revealed databases replete with private information of students with disabilities, recordings categorized by trauma type, and analytical frameworks for vulnerability patterns. My performance of desperation yielded results, but I detested the person I was becoming. Evidence emerged demonstrating Rachel had been scrutinizing my entire family's dynamics through our recorded dialogues. She had treated my descriptions of family interactions as data concerning collective trauma responses. My accounts of Nathan's protectiveness, my mother's anxiety, my father's detachment, all became investigative material regarding how families adjust to acquired disabilities. My former romantic partner contacted me with unsettling news. Rachel had approached him seeking interviews about my pre-disability personality. She desired to construct longitudinal analyses comparing who I was before to who I had become. He had declined, but others had not. High school acquaintances, former teammates, old educators. She had contacted them all, constructing a comprehensive portrayal of my transformation. The strain of combating Rachel while maintaining my academic performance triggered severe health complications. Spasticity worsened until transfers became perilous. Chronic discomfort intensified until medication provided minimal relief. My meticulously preserved independence crumbled as my physical form reacted to psychological distress with bodily deterioration. Rachel documented these alterations as well, incorporating them into her study on stress responses within disabled populations. My part-time campus employment ceased when Rachel shared apprehensions with my supervisor. She had presented recordings of me expressing frustration about work tasks, framing normal expressions of discontent as proof of instability. The lost income meant choosing between rental payments and medical provisions. I began omitting physical therapy sessions to conserve funds, aware that Rachel would document the decline in my physical capabilities. A public confrontation at the Disability Resource Center unveiled Rachel's influence. Staff disclosed she had been consulting with them as an authority on my situation. While I sought accommodations, she provided context concerning my mental state. Her academic credentials conferred upon her the authority to shape how support services perceived me. The individuals intended to assist me had been transformed into supplementary data sources. My housing application for the subsequent semester was rejected. Rachel's documented apprehensions regarding my behavioral instability had been included in my residential life dossier. The accessible dormitory room I required was allocated to another student while I sought off-campus alternatives. Every apartment viewing served as a reminder of how thoroughly she had dismantled my existence. I relocated to an accessible motel room, paying weekly with diminishing savings. The confined area barely accommodated my wheelchair. I observed through social media as Rachel presented her research at esteemed conferences. She garnered accolades for innovation while I struggled to afford groceries. My narrative financed her ascending career while I confronted homelessness. My younger sibling implored me to cease my conflict with Rachel. The family could not endure the incessant discord. They perceived Rachel as helpful and me as destructive. My siblings' tears deeply affected me. I was fracturing our family by refusing to accept Rachel's assistance. The isolation felt absolute. Even my own family viewed me as the problem. My investigation uncovered another victim, a student with cerebral palsy whom Rachel had studied the preceding year. When I contacted them with corroborating evidence, they blamed me for ruining the sole individual who had understood them. Their family threatened legal action if I persisted in harassing Rachel. She had aided their child in accessing mental health resources. They asserted that the fact she had also appropriated their private moments was irrelevant. More victims emerged as I delved deeper. Each one Rachel had convinced they were unique. Each one she had systematically documented. Some still defended her, unable to accept that their camaraderie had been fabricated. Others were too apprehensive to speak out, concerned about losing support networks. I felt compelled to continue exposing her despite the knowledge that each revelation shattered another vulnerable person's world. My last remaining friend posed challenging inquiries. What if Rachel's research genuinely benefited individuals with disabilities? What if her methods, though ethically questionable, yielded valuable insights? Was I undermining significant research out of personal resentment? I could not respond without appearing self-serving. The argument for the greater good haunted me. Was my confidentiality more valuable than potential breakthroughs in trauma therapy? I made the most arduous decision of my life. To substantiate Rachel's exploitation, I publicly disclosed the extent of my suicidal ideation following the accident. I shared specifics I had never revealed to anyone except Rachel, re-traumatizing my family and companions. Witnessing my mother's tears as she learned how narrowly she had avoided losing me felt like a betrayal, but I needed people to grasp what Rachel had stolen. The evidence revealed my own complicity. I had overlooked multiple opportunities to seek appropriate assistance because I had become emotionally reliant on Rachel's support. Professional therapists, legitimate support groups, genuine friends. I had chosen Rachel instead. My desperate yearning for comprehension had rendered me susceptible to exploitation. The realization that I had participated in my own manipulation was devastating. Rachel's research advisor expedited the ethics review to safeguard the department's standing. The hearing was scheduled on my regular medical appointment day, with limited committee availability cited as the rationale. My health had deteriorated so significantly under the stress that missing treatment was not an option. I faced a choice between my physical well-being and my pursuit of justice. Understanding Rachel's motivation exacerbated everything. She genuinely believed her research would revolutionize trauma therapy. In her perception, capturing authentic experiences of individuals with disabilities without clinical filters would transform treatment approaches. Her methods were flawed, but her intentions were not entirely malicious. She had become habituated to the intimacy of others' suffering while persuading herself she was providing assistance. The most disturbing revelation was that Rachel harbored affection for me, not as a friend, but as a captivating subject whose adaptation patterns enthralled her. Her fondness was genuine, yet filtered through academic fascination. She cared about my continued health because my ongoing survival signified more data. The amalgamation of authentic emotion and clinical interest rendered her betrayal more intricate than simple exploitation. Combating Rachel necessitated infringing upon my own ethical principles. To substantiate patterns of exploitation, I had to disseminate the private information of other victims. Their narratives were not mine to disclose, but sharing them was the sole means to establish systematic abuse. I became an accomplice in the very privacy violations I was opposing. Each revelation felt like a betrayal of vulnerable individuals who had already been betrayed. My convictions regarding the protection of vulnerable persons crumbled. As desperation intensified, I manipulated Catherine into revealing further evidence by feigning suicidal tendencies. I recorded other victims without their knowledge, accumulating proof of Rachel's methods. I employed the exact techniques Rachel had imparted to me, becoming a reflection of my exploiter. Triumph would require becoming what I despised. The conclusive evidence originated from Rachel's research assistant. I convinced Catherine I was contemplating self-harm once more, knowing her training would compel her to act. She disclosed archived recordings of Rachel instructing other researchers in manipulative techniques. The systematic nature of the exploitation became undeniable. Rachel had not merely studied me. She had forged a blueprint for exploiting vulnerable populations. Exposing Rachel's methods felt hollow when I recognized what I had become. The pursuit of justice had transformed me into someone equally manipulative. I had learned to weaponize vulnerability, to perform trauma for desired outcomes, to infringe upon others' privacy for substantiation. Rachel had instructed me thoroughly. The apprentice had become the mentor, and I loathed myself for it. Rachel's appeal to the ethics committee centered on her pioneering research contributions. She presented testimonials from academics who had utilized her data to formulate novel therapeutic approaches. The committee faced a dilemma: safeguarding vulnerable subjects versus advancing disability research, innovation against ethics, progress versus consent, my trauma against potential breakthroughs. Everything hinged on whether the committee prioritized research innovation over subject protection. Rachel's methodologies were proliferating through academic departments nationwide. Young researchers regarded her as a trailblazer who had discovered means to capture authentic experiences of individuals with disabilities. If the committee ruled in her favor, exploitation would become standard practice. If they ruled against her, significant research might be suppressed. The ethics hearing approached with both of us visibly scarred by our conflict. My health had noticeably declined. Weight reduction, increased spasticity, persistent exhaustion from the struggle. Rachel's refined academic facade had crumbled as whispers about her methods circulated through conferences. We had mutually devastated each other in pursuit of our respective truths. Neither of us would emerge unaltered. My relationship with Nathan reached a critical juncture. He brought Rachel to meet our extended family at our cousin's nuptials. She captivated everyone with tales of assisting me, employing intimate knowledge of family dynamics to appear as though she belonged. Observing her integrate into my family, while I sat isolated, felt like losing everything. She wore my grandmother's bracelet that Nathan had given her, a family heirloom I had described in recordings. Academic colleagues began aligning themselves. Some endorsed Rachel's inventive research approaches, arguing that conventional methods failed to capture authentic experiences of individuals with disabilities. Others recognized the exploitation, understanding that consent could not be retroactively granted. The field of disability studies bifurcated between those prioritizing research advancement and those safeguarding vulnerable subjects. My situation became a battleground for conflicting ethical philosophies. I ascertained that the ethics review process afforded more protection to researchers than to subjects. University liability depended on defending approved research methods. If Rachel's approach was deemed unethical, every study employing similar methods would face scrutiny. The institution possessed financial incentives to legitimize her work. My individual exploitation held less significance than preserving the university's research funding and reputation. A disability rights attorney revealed the extent of Rachel's influence. Psychology departments nationwide were adopting her methods as standard procedure. Young researchers attended her workshops on subject cultivation. Universities lauded her innovative approaches to accessing vulnerable populations. My exploitation had been transformed into a pedagogical tool, spreading through academia like in contagion. Future students with disabilities would encounter similar infringements. The attorney would only pursue my case if I accepted media exposure. Dismantling Rachel meant publicly disclosing my most private moments, my suicide attempt, my difficulties with personal hygiene, my identity crisis. Everything would become news. The attorney elucidated that public pressure was the sole means to compel institutional transformation. My trauma would need to become a spectacle to avert the exploitation of others. Media coverage unveiled how widely my narrative had disseminated without my awareness. Rachel had been presenting my case study at conferences for 2 years. Disability researchers recognized specifics from her presentations. I had been unknowingly prominent in academic circles, my trauma discussed in lecture halls and symposiums. Strangers possessed intimate details about my existence while I remained anonymous. Recordings from subject TM conferences emerged, depicting Rachel instructing on subject management techniques. She guided researchers on cultivating trust with vulnerable populations, maintaining access through emotional manipulation, and documenting authentic responses. My exploitation had become a curriculum. She had systematized the violation of privacy for individuals with disabilities, crafting academic frameworks for abuse. The evidence proved Rachel coached others in strategies for emotional manipulation. Young researchers learned to identify indicators of vulnerability, exploit support requirements, and maintain subject compliance through calculated companionship. She had professionalized predation, imbuing it with academic legitimacy. The scope extended far beyond my singular instance. She had devised an entire methodology of exploitation. I understood that achieving justice meant preventing Rachel's methods from becoming standard practice. This was not merely about my pilfered privacy or violated trust. Future students with disabilities would suffer if her approach gained acceptance. My struggle transcended personal vindication. I had to endure public scrutiny to shield others from analogous exploitation. The choice felt insurmountable: my privacy or their protection. The local news correspondent contacted me after discovering conference footage online. Rachel had presented my case at 12 academic conferences over 2 years, each time playing more intimate recordings. Disability studies researchers across 3 states recognized specifics from her presentations. Graduate students informed me they had analyzed my adaptation patterns in their coursework. I had become a teaching illustration without ever realizing it. I discovered details of my case study circulating in research forums. Anonymous posts discussed subject TMs, captivating trauma responses, and debated Rachel's methodology. Researchers shared timestamps of particularly compelling audio excerpts. Someone had constructed a timeline of my mental health deterioration based on Rachel's presentations. My most susceptible moments had become academic entertainment. Conference recordings arrived from a sympathetic attendee. The footage depicted Rachel demonstrating what she termed organic trust-building techniques. She played audio of our initial conversations, pausing to highlight opportunities for manipulation. The audience took notes as she elucidated how to identify optimal windows of vulnerability in subjects with disabilities. My exploitation had become a masterclass. The evidence revealed Rachel's systematic approach to emotional manipulation. She had created flowcharts illustrating how to respond to various trauma responses. Decision trees mapped pathways from initial contact to sustained access. She instructed researchers to recognize patterns of resistance and overcome them utilizing subjects' own therapeutic objectives. Every facet of our friendship had been meticulously orchestrated. I comprehended that halting Rachel meant preventing an entire methodology from disseminating. Psychology departments had already integrated her techniques into graduate training. Young researchers viewed her as innovative rather than exploitative. If her methods gained institutional endorsement, thousands of vulnerable individuals would face similar infringements. My personal battle had evolved into a systemic conflict. The decision to provide public testimony meant accepting perpetual exposure. Court documents would preserve my trauma in legal records. Academic papers would reference my case for decades. Future researchers would examine my exploitation as a historical precedent. I affixed my signature to the consent forms for public testimony, cognizant that my privacy would never fully return. Rachel's excessive self-assurance led to her downfall at the national conference. She presented audio of my suicide attempt to illustrate authentic trauma capture. The recording played for 300 attendees while she discussed remarkable data quality. Several disability advocates in the audience immediately recognized the exploitation. They recorded her presentation, generating evidence of her methods. My testimony to the ethics committee focused on averting future harm rather than personal retribution. I presented Rachel's instructional materials, demonstrating how she had systematized exploitation. I showcased the manipulative techniques she imparted to others. I kept the emphasis on safeguarding future students rather than dwelling on my own suffering. The committee needed to grasp that this was not isolated misconduct, but an emerging methodology. Academic momentum shifted as more victims came forward. Students with disabilities from multiple universities shared comparable experiences with researchers employing the TM method. Parents discovered their children's private moments in published research. Leaders of support groups realized their meetings had been infiltrated. The pattern of exploitation became irrefutable as evidence accumulated. The night prior to the ethics hearing, I prepared my conclusive evidence. Rachel's own recordings would incriminate her, hours of her discussing subject cultivation with colleagues. I arranged testimonies from other victims who had consented to speak. Catherine had supplied training documents illustrating the deliberate nature of the exploitation. Everything pointed to systematic abuse disguised as innovation. The ethics committee hearing commenced in a compact conference room. My advocate sat beside me while Rachel entered with Dr. Chun and 2 university legal representatives. My parents were seated in the back row, having chosen to support Rachel despite everything. The committee members reviewed voluminous folders of evidence. No media were permitted, maintaining the focus on academic impropriety rather than public scandal. Both Rachel and I exhibited severe repercussions from our conflict. My weight loss and increased spasticity were apparent. Rachel's polished academic demeanor had disintegrated. She appeared exhausted and defensive. We had spent months mutually destroying each other. The committee observed 2 individuals broken by their contention over research ethics. Neither of us resembled who we had been when this ordeal began. The truth emerged through Rachel's own recordings. Audio played of her characterizing me as an ideal subject who performed trauma beautifully. She had labeled my suicide attempt compelling data and lauded my authentic vulnerability. The committee heard her instruct others to cultivate dependency in research subjects. Her clinical lexicon stripped away any pretense of compassion. Catherine's testimony proved pivotal. She detailed her training in emotional manipulation, presenting the committee with Rachel's instructional manuals. She admitted to targeting 3 other students with disabilities using techniques Rachel had taught her. She had recognized the exploitation only after I had confronted her. Her testimony revealed how Rachel's methods were already permeating academic networks. The ethics committee's decision was swift. They mandated an immediate review of all research involving vulnerable populations at universities employing Rachel's methods. Her techniques were formally prohibited from academic utilization. Existing studies employing her methodology faced scrutiny. The committee recognized the systematic nature of the exploitation and acted to prevent its proliferation. Previously authenticated conference recordings became crucial evidence. Footage depicted Rachel instructing dozens of researchers in manipulative techniques during professional development workshops. She had initiated an entire academic movement centered on exploiting vulnerable subjects. The committee recognized how close her methods had come to becoming standard practice. Their ruling averted a new form of institutional abuse. Evidence proved Rachel's methods intentionally fostered dependency while extracting trauma data. She devised protocols to maintain subjects' emotional reliance on researchers. Her techniques ensured continuous access to private moments. The manipulation was deliberate, systematic, and spreading. The committee recognized this as a fundamental breach of research ethics, necessitating immediate intervention. Rachel's emotional collapse during the hearing unveiled complex motivations. She genuinely believed her research would assist individuals with disabilities by capturing authentic experiences. She had become engrossed in the intimacy of others' pain while convincing herself she was advancing treatment. She wept while describing how the research had consumed her existence. The committee observed an individual who had lost herself in her work. The committee extended an offer to me, a position developing new research protection protocols. They desired my experience to shape policies safeguarding vulnerable populations. I would contribute to establishing mandatory consent procedures and subject advocacy requirements. My exploitation could prevent future infringements. The offer signified transforming my trauma into systemic change. I opted for advocacy over retribution. Instead of pursuing personal damages, I requested comprehensive reform, mandatory consent protocols, regular subject welfare inspections, and independent advocacy for vulnerable research participants. I desired Rachel to receive treatment rather than mere punishment. The focus remained on preventing future exploitation rather than vengeance. Rachel faced academic penalties and compulsory psychological treatment. Her research career concluded, but she avoided criminal charges. She commenced therapy to address her preoccupation with others' trauma. The committee mandated her to undergo ethics retraining before any future academic endeavors. Her consequence centered on rehabilitation rather than destruction. 3 months later, the disability community remained fragmented. Some endorsed my advocacy, appreciative of the new safeguards. Others expressed concern that research limitations would restrict academic comprehension of disabled experiences. Support groups debated whether Rachel's methods, despite being unethical, had yielded valuable insights. The community grappled with balancing protection against research necessities. My new capacity as a research ethics advocate entailed constant reminders of my trauma. Every policy meeting required revisiting my exploitation. Training sessions necessitated explaining how Rachel had manipulated me. I assisted other victims in navigating the reporting process. My private suffering had become a public resource for averting future harm. Federal research protections were enacted 6 months later. My case became the primary illustration in training materials. Universities implemented mandatory advocate programs for vulnerable research subjects. Consent procedures demanded independent verification. Rachel's methods became a cautionary narrative taught in research ethics courses. The personal costs remained substantial. My family relationships never fully recovered. Nathan maintained his distance, unable to reconcile my actions with Rachel's version of events. My parents insisted that Rachel had attempted to assist even after reviewing the evidence. Some friendships terminated permanently. Privacy became unattainable as my narrative disseminated through academic and advocacy circles. My health stabilized, but never reverted to pre-conflict levels. The stress had induced permanent increases in spasticity. Chronic discomfort necessitated ongoing management. Trust remained challenging. I questioned everyone's motives, wondering who might be observing me. Rachel had taught me to perceive potential exploitation everywhere. The motel room became my permanent abode. I could not afford accessible housing on an advocate's remuneration. The confined space daily reminded me of the price of confronting Rachel. But calls from protected students made it worthwhile. Parents expressed gratitude for my preventing their children's exploitation. Researchers contacted me for ethical guidance. Catherine completed her own ethics training and transitioned into an advocate. She worked to identify students targeted by researchers employing Rachel's methods. Her insider knowledge helped expose ongoing exploitation. She testified at other universities, sharing how she had been trained to manipulate vulnerable individuals. Her transformation from exploiter to protector demonstrated that change was attainable. My narrative appeared in ethics textbooks within a year. Case studies analyzed the exploitation, consent infringements, and systemic failures. Students debated whether Rachel's intentions held significance given her methodologies. Professors utilized my experience to impart lessons on research boundaries. My trauma educated future researchers about ethical limitations. Rachel dispatched one letter through her therapist. She acknowledged the harm she had inflicted while maintaining her research possessed merit. She described her own therapeutic journey, learning to differentiate academic curiosity from human connection. She did not solicit forgiveness, but wished me to comprehend that she finally understood the violation. I never responded. The disability advocacy group was reformed with new safeguards. Researchers required explicit authorization to attend. Meetings included independent advocates monitoring for exploitation. Members learned to recognize manipulative tactics. The group that had been Rachel's laboratory evolved into a paradigm for protected peer support. A year later, I provided testimony before a congressional subcommittee regarding research ethics. My wheelchair did not fit comfortably at the witness table. Committee members listened as I detailed systematic exploitation disguised as innovation. My testimony supported federal funding for subject advocacy programs. Genuine change occurred gradually through bureaucratic processes. My daily routine revolved around preventing what had happened to me. Morning calls with victims of exploitation, afternoon policy meetings, evening support groups for research subjects, weekends dedicated to reviewing consent procedures. My existence centered on protective work. The trauma that defined me became my purpose. The final ethics review confirmed Rachel's permanent prohibition from human subjects research. Her methodology papers were retracted from academic journals. Conference presentations featuring my recordings were removed from archives. Her academic legacy erased, supplanted by warnings about exploitation. She now worked in data entry, far removed from vulnerable populations. 2 years after everything commenced, I attended a conference on research ethics. Speakers referenced my case while discussing protection protocols. Young researchers approached me with inquiries about ethical boundaries. I had become what Rachel had made me, a teaching example. But this time, I had chosen the lesson being conveyed. My testimony helped establish the National Center for Research Subject Protection. The center provided advocates, reviewed consent procedures, and investigated reports of exploitation. Funding originated from universities previously utilizing Rachel's methods. Institutions that had facilitated exploitation now contributed to prevention. I never regained the ability to walk, but I learned to navigate more than just the campus. The protection systems I helped create prevented thousands of vulnerable individuals from experiencing what I had. Rachel's exploitation of my trauma ultimately shielded others from similar harm. My appropriated privacy became a public safeguard for future research subjects. The work persisted daily, reviewing protocols, training advocates, supporting victims. Each protected student justified the immense cost. My suffering had transformed into systemic change. Not the healing I had envisioned, but purpose born from exploitation. Rachel had rendered me a subject. I had forged myself into a guardian.